Welcome to the Mick, a Luke, and a Mike. Hosted by four-time Emmy-nominated producer Frank Mace and retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor.
Today's guest, author, director of shows like Friends and Frazier, also senior director of the Washington, D.C. Ford's Theater, Sheldon EPPS.
My brother
Frank. How you doing, pal?
I'm doing fine. We got a great guest today, Sheldon EPPS. Big-time director, now working senior artistic director at Washington, D.C.'s Ford Theater. That's the theater where Abe Lincoln bought his lunch. It should be a really good.
Abe Lincoln brought his lunch. Bought his lunch or brought his lunch?
Abe Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater.
Ford's Theater.
Yeah, it was a bad attempt at humor by me.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how'd you like the movie?
Yeah.
How'd you like the play?
Yeah. Speaking of plays,
Yeah.
about 2 weeks ago, they held the Gold Cup final in Los Angeles. What was that?
Nothing. Go ahead. I know where this is going. Go ahead.
What was that?
Do your thing.
So the tickets, I mean, an upper level ticket was like $450 a piece. And the place was sold out.
Soccer game.
Yeah, I don't care what the hell a game it was. It could have been the finals of the World
Sold out. $450.
Yeah. Would you pay that?
No, I wouldn't pay that. I'd pay $400, $450 if they were all jumping rope naked. I wouldn't pay that kind of money with a soccer game. No, I wouldn't pay that for just about anything. You know.
Well, what about Springsteen? Would you pay for Springsteen?
No, absolutely not.
Why?
Well, I mean, you know, I remember Springsteen when he was like 23, 24, and he was terrific. And I'd pay $20 to go see him. Why am I going to pay $450?
$20. What year was that?
Well, the first time I saw Springsteen, I think was 73. Okay. It was right before it was on the cover of Time. So I think it was 73, maybe 72.
Yeah, I saw the Stones for like $25 in 75.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So, I mean, how would you pay that kind of money to see these guys on their swan song? I mean, look, I don't care who you are, whether it's in acting. You look at De Niro, Pacino, they're all good, but they're still living on their reps, I think. I don't think they're going to do anything like they.
Okay, so take someone like Taylor Swift, whose tickets are now going for $3,500 on the aftermarket. I mean, who the hell has that kind of money?
Apparently somebody does. I mean, but she's still selling out. I mean, I don't know who would pay $3,500 to see her. But again, my point is, all of these guys have done better work, and you know, I mean, we all have. I mean, you know, when you get older, you can't do what you did when you were young. I mean, and their breakthrough stuff was a lot better than now. I mean, Elton John, case in point, he's on a farewell tour. All right, I mean, he's Elton John, Sir Elton. He's done a lot of great stuff. You look at his history, he's amazing. Broadway, everything else. But do you really want to see a guy? I mean, I saw him 6 times for like $30. Why would I go?
Yeah, I saw him 6 times. Well, not 6 times, probably 4 times. And one time was 10 years ago. I paid $75.
Yeah.
Now
I would pay $75.
Me too. But let's talk. Let's ask let's ask the person who obviously affluent person at this table who has got thousands of dollars to spend on concert tickets. How come, Derek?
Well, the first thing I would say is you spent $25 on the Rolling Stones,
right.
Okay, and you spent $20
yeah,
roughly.
25, 30.
Okay,
yeah,
25. Okay, 25, 30. And in 1970, $25 is the value of $196.
I'd pay $196 to go to see a soccer game.
You know what?
Okay.
Okay.
That's a good point.
But the point is that you paid $20, which probably wasn't even a stretch back then, right? So if you think about, let's say a stretch would have been $50, so now we're at $400.
Yeah.
Yeah,
inflation. I get inflation.
Don't buy into that shit. Like,
don't
buy into that bullshit so
He's
fast.
got a point. Hang on.
He doesn't have a point. We're talking about.
You don't agree with me.
We're talking about. Exactly. We're talking about $900 for a soccer game now.
Wait a second.
I can afford $900 for a soccer game. I wouldn't pay it.
Let me just throw this into the equation.
You could throw anything you want in. Fucking equation.
I spent $20 for the ticket, but I spent $400 on drugs to go to show. There's always that. Yeah. Now, what would the ticket cost me today if I had to spend that?
What would the drugs cost you today?
Exactly. We're talking $5,000 area. We're talking Taylor Swift area here.
Well, I mean, that's the difference.
Let's bring Joe West on, a man who's got $5,000 to spend on tickets.
Or just pay $5,000 in fines.
Smiling Joe West, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking all that money I did spend on fines, you know. So, I think the funny thing is, you guys were, I mean, Billy's talking about, he didn't sing as well as he did back then when you saw him for $20. But, you know, there's some older artists that sang very well right up to the end. I mean, Tony Bennett still sings well, and Elvis sang well till the very end, and Merle Haggard did too, you know. And, the funny thing about
we're only laughing because Derek said, I don't think I've ever heard of Merle Haggard, and I said, Derek, right. if you listen to the show, Joe mentioned Merle Haggard at least once every time he comes on the show.
Well, there's another artist that used to sell his CDs with his ticket when you would go see Prince. Prince included a CD with your ticket. So his album sales were as big as anybody at that time, because if he'd sell out for 20,000 people in the arena, he sold 20,000 albums that night.
He's smart.
That's really smart. That's a guy I never heard that. Did you know that about
Prince? I did.
Yeah.
That's great marketing, man. I never knew that.
And you know, Garth Brooks taught me this a long time ago. He said, I give away the first 2 rows of every concert I do. And the first 2 rows are his to give away to the roadies, the band members. We have family coming in. And when he plays the big arena, he has so many tickets, he has to give some of those first 2 rows away. So he hires a runner to go up in the upper deck of the arena and find a family of 4 that looks like they probably couldn't afford to be there. And he brings them down in one of those seats in the first 2 rows. He doesn't give them their money back, but he gives them seats in the first 2 rows. Now, don't you think those kids go out and buy everything that Garth Brooks ever did because they got to see him from the first 2 rows? And, of course, the runner says, these are from Garth. Enjoy the show. And they leave.
Yeah, you know, talk about old-timers. In 1992 or 93, when I was working with Rickles, we went to see him perform. Him open for Frank Sinatra. And then Frank Sinatra came out. He gave a pretty solid performance. He probably, you know, not the old Sinatra, but he probably hit a double or a triple. And I said to a friend of mine, well, Sinatra's 80 years old. What would you give to see Joe DiMaggio hit a double or a triple at 80 years old? He couldn't do it. So enjoy the Sinatra now for what he is, instead of saying he's not what he was.
I agree with that. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, matter of fact, I saw Sinatra 4 or 5 times. And the last time I saw him, he was forgetting words.
How much you pay for it?
You know what? It wasn't that much. I think I paid $100, the most I ever paid to see him back then. You know, but I agree with that. But by the same token, I mean, what he can do now. But when you think about, I saw him at his peak for 1/5 the price. It makes me reluctant to shell out that kind of bread. You know, I mean, that's me.
Derek, don't feel bad. If he spent $100 on Sinatra, that's like the $450 you spent. So that's how long ago Sinatra was alive. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, don't be so quick.
Why not? What do you want? Controversy? Why you all wet, Joe? What the fuck are you now? You don't know nothing about Sinatra. You're not even Italian.
Oh yeah. What am I going to do with you?
Anything you want? What am I going to do? Look, with the money you're paying me, you can do anything you want. With the checks, am I getting them in the mail? Anything you say, pal.
Yeah, all our money's going to Joe.
For fines.
for fines. What's the most you ever got fined, Joe?
Well, I think the suspensions cost you more than the fines did. You know, I got suspended 3 days for pushing Joe Torre back in, I think it was the early 80s. He followed us into the runway where our locker room was, and I turned around and pushed him and said, you don't belong here. and he realized he didn't, and he left. And so I got suspended for 3 days, and Torrey got fined. But yeah, I can't remember the dollar amount.
Who ratted you out when you pushed Torrey? I mean, was there a mob?
Oh, the media was there. Okay. So when Torrey told him, yeah, Joe West pushed me, they came to my locker room. I said, yeah, absolutely did. He didn't belong there. And I don't think Torrey was upset about the incident. I think he was upset that either one of us got disciplined because all we were trying to do was stop the argument. I mean, he was arguing with another umpire, and he followed us in someplace he didn't belong. So, but that was so long ago. You know, there's people that are going to see this podcast, and they're going to say, 1981. What? Jesus, what year was that? So,
Derek wasn't even born in 1981. Were you, Derek?
Come on.
Probably not.
Oh, I was born. I was around.
When were you born?
1970.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, and you don't remember Merle Haggard?
Now
I spent 20 years in prison.
Now it's time for Billy to say 1970. I got underwear older than that, right?
I got a ball spot older than that. Never mind my underwear.
Oh, shucks. What else?
What else is up? Yeah.
Joe, you're not playing golf today. How hot is it in Florida?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's in the 90s every day, and it rains every afternoon about 1 or 2 o'clock. We're right on the rain schedule right now. It should start any second now.
Yeah, I heard the oceans are like like
saunas,
really bad. I mean, really like hot pools or whatever they call them.
It's funny you talk about the rain starts every day at about 2 o'clock. That was in Jacksonville. Again, rain started every day around 2-3 o'clock, and during soccer practice was right around that time. So we'd always get soaked. Every time after soccer practice, everything got soaked. And when we were in college, as soon as everything got soaked, it got thrown in the bottom of our lockers, and it stayed there for the rest of the year. So there was some pretty good mold building up in that those locker rooms after the pretty good mold and pretty good odors emanating from those locker rooms.
You know, I love Florida. I lived in Florida for about 10 years in different parts of Florida. And I love Florida. But after a hurricane, the mosquitoes are insane. I mean, it's an insane proposition. You can't even go out. One of the things out west, in Arizona, and the desert, of course,
way out
mosquitoes.
West. Way out west.
Way out west. No mosquitoes, yeah. But I mean, I love Florida. I still miss Florida, you know, because I always had a good time.
And it misses you too.
Oh, I'm sure. Without a doubt.
But you're trying to send him back here.
Yeah.
Export me.
We'll send you back to see DeSantis.
Deport me.
We'll send you back to see DeSantis.
Yeah, he's struggling a little bit with his campaign, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's picking a lot of wars. I don't know if he can win the one with Disney. I mean, that's a. You know what? I Joe, you can verify this or not. I don't know. When I was in Florida, I had to drive from Gainesville down to Homestead a lot, which is right where before you get into the Keys. Right, it's the last town before you hit the Keys. It's about 110 miles, 120 miles, and I had to, I do like 80, 85, except when I was in Orlando. When I was in Orlando, I'd go 95 or 100 because nobody gets a speeding ticket in Orlando, because Disney doesn't want anybody to come to Orlando and have a bad experience. I mean, I think that's how much clout they got. I've never seen anybody get a speeding ticket in Orlando.
Well, Joe, you live near Orlando, don't you?
Yeah, I'm about 20 minutes from the airport, 25 minutes from the airport. I'm just west of there. And, Disney's brought a lot to this community here. All the mistakes that Walt Disney made opening in Anaheim, he corrected when he got here. He built the Disney property on a 10-foot platform so you could get everything underneath it for deliveries and stuff. In fact, it's bigger than 10 feet because some of those trucks that go in there are taller than 10 feet tall. But he corrected everything that he felt was a mistake in Anaheim. Like the first time, he ran out of food and he ran out of beverages, and he had no way to get them to the vendors. And so he corrected that by building the platform for everything to be delivered underneath it. And he came down here. It was like a covert operation to buy up all the property, because there was nothing on this property down here. There was orange groves here and there, and he was buying them, some as little as $300 an acre. And he tried to get a bunch of his Hollywood friends to go in with him, and they didn't. So he built it himself. So it's a great facility and place to take your kids. Of course, it's getting awful expensive. It's almost as bad as that $450 soccer ticket.
Almost.
But not quite. But I mean, it's an amazing thing. And then they moved SeaWorld in, and that was part of the thing that after the construction of Disney World. But it's quite the operation.
But still, answer the question: have you ever gotten a speeding ticket?
No.
See, you're right.
That's why I was always trying to beat the system. I was always looking for an edge,
Well,
but I don't think that's the battle. I don't think DeSantis can win. I mean, they supply a lot of jobs, et cetera, et cetera. Then the immigration thing, you got a lot of crops got to get picked. And tell me who's going to go on a roof in Florida to do work. You've never been on a roof. I'm sure doing roofing. So it's got to be the hardest freaking job that there is. It's insane.
In the heat, in the tar.
Yeah. Wow. Who's going to do that job? I mean, you're not picking vegetables, but roofing is worse.
The same thing's true in California. The same thing's true in California. If you took all the illegals out of California, she'd shut down.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I defy anybody. I was in the restaurant business to run a restaurant in Manhattan without illegals.
Yeah, and we're getting to the point where we got to move on. But if you took all the illegals out of Florida, New York, Texas, California, who would raise our children? Who would cut our grass? Who would do our roofs? Who would work in restaurants? It's crazy.
Yeah, it's
just crazy.
Tough battle to win. I mean, I get it. You don't want to open borders, but by the same token, there's unintended consequences, and the cost of everything is going to go up. And
Yep, that's true. Well, Joe.
I think on a serious note for a change.
On a serious note, we got to save up our money to go to the next soccer game, because the soccer game, Messi's now playing in Florida, so I'm sure those tickets are going to go up to $1,000 a piece. So save your money, Joe, and we'll talk to you next time.
Okay, it's great to see you guys.
Give our love to
Good
Rita.
seeing you too, Joe.
All right.
I'll do it.
Thanks, pal. He's great, isn't he?
Oh, he's all right. What does that mean?
I don't know what's
I
going
wish
on.
the buck was still when the country was strong.
Yes, Merle.
Can we use this?
I'm going to.
Back before
Okay. See you, Joe.
here now.
Okay.
Save your Dixie cups. The South shall rise again.
All right. On that note, Derek, my friend.
Yeah. Yes.
Could you be so kind as to bring our guest on, Sheldon EPPS, director, artistic director at the Forge Theater, and author of a fabulous memoir called My Own Directions. Can you bring him on, please? My friend, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. That's Billy O'Connor, my
How are
partner,
you, Sheldon? Nice to know you.
and that's my other partner,
Hello,
Derek
hello.
Harris. Can you hear?
Whatever you-
Can you
I
hear?
can
us?
hear you. I can't see anybody, but I can hear you.
Okay, here we go. So, apologies.
No worries.
Can you see us now?
Okay.
There you go. Now I can. Now I
All right.
can.
So
Yes.
I will say hello again.
You guys are all fancy there,
We
huh?
are fancy. We got multiple cameras. We got switchers. We got viewers,
Wow.
and we got Sheldon EPPS,
got
acclaimed
Sheldon.
Here I am.
acclaimed author, acclaimed director of plays and televisions. And how you been?
I've been well. Fortunately, pretty busy up until right now when everything has stopped. But been doing a lot of theater. I did a show in Washington, D.C. at Ford's Theater, where I'm on the staff now. And then I did one in Chicago, which was great. I love being in Chicago. Great town.
What are the names of the shows?
The one in D.C. is called Shout, Sister Shout, and it's about Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the great blues singer, blues, jazz, gospel singer, guitarist, who, every great guitarist credits her with creating a new style of playing the electric guitar. And the show in Chicago is called Personality, and it's about Lloyd Price. Do you know who Lloyd Price is? Remember Lloyd Price?
Yep, we do.
Yep. Rock personality, talk
personality.
Yeah,
there you go.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a bio-musical about Lloyd's life.
All the years you were with Pasadena, do you prefer doing like musical comedies, obviously, or do you like drama? Do you like musical comedy or musicals? Musicals in general?
I really like both. I feel really lucky that I've had the opportunity to do both. To tell you the truth, I always want to do next a different thing than the one I just did. When I'm doing a straight play, I always think, if there was some music in this, if there was a song here, this would work so well. And when I'm doing a musical, I say, if I have to hear 5, 6, 7, 8 one more time, I'm going to lose my mind. Just getting rid of all these dancers and musical people and all of that. But I love doing both, and I love having the chance to go back and forth between the two.
Well, I tell you, now you're an author, and you did this during COVID, right? Because you just felt like you couldn't take any downtime. You said, "The hell with this! I'm going to write a book."
Well, that's true. That's true. I left Pasadena Playhouse in 2017. And when I stepped down, people kept saying, "Oh, you should write a book. Why don't you write a book?" And I go, what am I going to write? Why would I do that? But people kept saying that, and enough people say that, like to you, Frank. If enough people say that to you, you think, well, maybe I should write a book. And I kept saying I would do it and talking about it and thinking about it, and just didn't really have the time because I was back to work. But then that little thing called COVID hit, and we were all told to stay home. So my wife said to me one day, you have absolutely no excuse not to write this book now. So sit down and get started. And she was right. I had no reason not to do it. So I made that my day job. I just got up every day and made my coffee and then sat down and started writing.
And you had a lot to write about. Why don't you tell us about some of those stories? Must have been cathartic for you.
They were, and harder than the writing was sort of going back in time and putting yourself in the situation, because I think I wanted the book to be not just about what happened, but how I felt when it happened, which sometimes we don't give ourselves the time to think about. So the book is really about all the things in my life that led to my being at Pasadena Playhouse, which is something I never would have expected, and most people would not have expected, given that theater's history and this conservative nature of the theater and the town. So it's got all the things that led up to my arriving there as artistic director, and then to all the things that I faced while I was there. Many great things and joyous things, but some very tough things, some very challenging things, some real instances of racism and bias and discrimination, including, when I arrived, somebody wrote an article about my being appointed artistic director of this very conservative, supposedly conservative theater in a very conservative town. And there was an illustration of me being boiled in a pot of burning oil by rich Pasadenans, dancing around the urn while I was on flames. So that's the way it started.
Welcome to Pasadena.
That was the beginning. So we were off to quite a start with that.
Wow, funny but not funny. It's you mentioned conservative, and you can almost put that in quotes because really it means like I never noticed it. But when I was a kid, I was fortunate enough to go to a lot of Broadway plays because a friend of mine's sister used to work for Schubert. We got free tickets, and I never realized it when I was a kid going. I mean, I went to a lot of plays, but I never thought about it. But the audience was essentially white, and this is in New York. This is early.
Yeah. Well, I think it's true most places, and sadly, I think it's still true a lot of places. If I go to the theater in New York and look around at who else is there, which I always do, I'm shocked at the number of times that I'm still the only person of color in the audience. Usually, it's a much older audience, and that was definitely true. When I got to Pasadena, it was a very lily white, older crowd. And I said both of those things need to change. Number one, it needed to change because that audience was literally dying off. If something wasn't done about that to develop a new audience, there would be no audience in a few years. And I just didn't feel that the audience reflected, number one, Pasadena, and it certainly didn't reflect greater Los Angeles, which is such a diverse city. So I just felt it was fundamentally wrong that I would be the only person sitting in that courtyard before the show of any color. And at that time, the only person under 65.
Yeah.
I grew to be in that crowd before I left, but when I started out, I was much younger.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that happened once I guess my daughter was young, maybe she was 7 or 8, and I was coaching soccer, and we had a black girl on our teammate, and her dad passed away. So, of course, we went to the service, and we were the only white people at the service. And I said to my daughter, I said, "What do you notice about this?" And she says, "Nothing." And then I looked at her and I said, "Well, take a hard look and tell me what it is." And she said, "Daddy, we're the only white people here." And I said, "Yes. And can you remember that? Because that's the way Jazz feels every place she goes."
Right.
And that was the way I taught her about, racism and people being equal.
Yeah. No, it's true. I'm so glad you did that with her, because I think people don't realize that Black Americans, people of color, who have certain opportunities and certain education and get into certain situations, are frequently the only person of color in the room. I can't tell you the number of times I was at a meeting or on a TV set or in a rehearsal or whatever, where I was the only Black person, to the point where, it was always noticeable to me, but it stopped being uncomfortable because it happened so often. So I often point out to friends who have taken to see plays at Black theaters or taken to meetings of a certain sort, notice what it feels like to be the only person of a specific color in the room. What does that feel like? What does that make you feel? So it's a great lesson to have given her.
Well, back in I would think it'd be the 70s. How did you overcome that, and how did you? Because it must have been really prevalent back in the early 70s or in the 80s when you were trying to establish yourself. How did you establish that self and take that from? Well, you graduated from Carnegie Mellon in 1973, I believe, and you probably immediately tried to get into this business. What were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome? I mean, we know what the obstacles are. How did you overcome it?
Well, I guess tenacity and stubbornness takes you a long way. I was, as you said, I was trained at Carnegie Mellon University, and I was not the first or only Black student in the program, but I was one of the first and one of the only. And that training was very classical theater training, Shakespeare, Moliere, all of those, the classical writers. So, here I am, this little blackface graduating from Carnegie in 1973, going out in the world saying, okay, well, I'm prepared to do the same work that any other actor is. And the world was not certainly prepared for that and not ready for that. And so I met a lot of obstacles trying to establish an acting career. I did okay, but I certainly realized that there were plenty of doors at that time that were not open to me or firmly shut in my face. So what I did was I started a small theater company with a bunch of friends of mine from Carnegie, off Broadway. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to have a place where I could say, this is a play that I want to do, this is a play I want to act in, and could produce that play just because we wanted to do it, because I wanted to do it.
So you made your own break. You started your own company instead of depending on another's company to give you a job.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And to a certain degree, that was the first time I did that as a young actor. But then that's where I started directing. And I had the opportunity there, just as I did as an actor, to say, this is a play I want to direct. And so I directed all over the map culturally. And then I went to the Old Globe, and then I went to Pasadena Playhouse. So what I did was to always be in situations where I had some kind of control and some ability to say, this is the work that I want to do, and to do it. Now, the interesting thing is, and Frank, you know this, that once I got into doing television is all about getting the job done on schedule and on budget. Television, interestingly, cares far less about what color you are, as long as you get it done on time and on budget. So when I started doing TV, I much more quickly moved into doing Frazier and Friends and Everybody Loves Raymond. You know, once I got a reputation for getting the job done, being on schedule, not causing a lot of bitchiness on the set or anger on the set, television doors opened to me much more quickly than the doors of the theater did.
And quite honestly, you were good. So
well, that helps.
So that does help. But you were all of those things plus good at a time when television was seeking people of color as directors, and that gave you another advantage. So you were all of those things plus you were good. That made it easier for us to hire you.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. But yes, that's true. I was good at it. I was also good at it because I came from the theater, so I was used to working with actors, and I really think that became my calling card as a television director. Was I knew how to help actors get good performances. You know, a lot of people who are very successful television directors come up as editors or ADs. They haven't spent a whole lot of time talking to actors and don't know the actor's language. So what I was good at, if I was good, Frank, was working with actors and then learning the skills of doing for-camera sitcom to apply to telling a story, just as I did in the theater.
Okay, in theater and in television, you had to have a break. Somebody had to see you. So who saw you, or how did you get a break going from your own theater to, I got to look at my notes here.
Assistant director.
No, Blues in the Night. That was an off-Broadway show.
Yeah.
What was the break they made that? I'm sorry?
Oh, it just made the transition.
Yeah, made the transition there. And then did somebody see a play that you did that said, this guy can do television? So why don't you do those two things? What was your break in both of those?
Well, you mentioned it. My break in the theater was a show called Blues in the Night that I did pretty early in my career, that started in that tiny little theater that I mentioned, and eventually wound up on Broadway, and it was nominated for Tony. So that became sort of a calling card for me, and that's where I had the opportunity to start directing all over the country and London and a couple of places overseas. So, you know, that was my first big break in the theater that led to other theater work and then led to my being at the Old Globe as associate artistic director, which then led me to being at Pasadena Playhouse. Very soon after I got to Pasadena, it was actually a friend of mine.
What year did you get to Pasadena?
I started Pasadena. Well, the first time I directed at Pasadena was 1994.
Okay.
And a friend of mine named Paul Lazarus, who you may have worked with, Frank, at some point, was at that point a very successful television director. And he said, hey, do you have any interest at all in working in television? And I said, yeah, I guess so, maybe. Why not? Help pay some bills, so yeah, maybe. And he said, well, I'll invite my agent to come and see you. And his agents were Mitch Kaplan and Elliot Stoller, mm-hmm. who had a very well-respected sort of boutique agency,
which was called appropriately Kaplan Stoller Agency. Correct. You just mentioned it.
Cleverly called the Kaplan Stoller Agency. And they came and they saw the play and they thought the work on the play was good. And they said, okay, we're going to make you into a television director as well. And they did that. You know, I spent a couple of years on and off observing and finally got a shot doing the last episode of Evening Shade. We didn't know it was the last episode at the time, but it was canceled right after that. Hopefully not because of me, but it was canceled right after that.
So let me ask you, what was it like walking onto your stage of Evening Shade and having to direct Burt Reynolds?
Here's my secret. I knew that Burt was a theater lover. Wow. And Burt, I also knew that Burt could be difficult. You know, he had a reputation for that. It could be hard on directors. But I knew that he loved the theater. So I always used to try to go hang out on a set before I would direct for the first time, just so I wasn't walking in cold. So I went to hang out on the set of Evening Shade, and Burt was at the craft service table, and I said something about Sandy Meisner, the great theater director Correct. And teacher. And Burt's eyes lit up. He said, oh, God, you know Sandy Meisner? And I said, well, I don't know him, but I studied Meisner technique very well. Burt loved me from that moment on. Wow. He was famous for not wanting to rehearse, not wanting to come out of the dressing room, but he treated me so well, and you know, would always say, "You want to do it again?" You know, the AD was like, "What is going on here?" Burt never says that. So it was just because I mentioned somebody from the theater that he knew and really, really respected.
And Harry and Linda must have been great to work with also, correct?
Oh, you know, Evening Shade had a remarkable cast.
Why don't you tell us who was in the cast?
It was Hal Holbrook, Elizabeth Ashley, Ann Wedgeworth, Ossie Davis was on now and then, and Mary Lou Henner. I mean, it was an incredible group of actors. And then, you know, Harry producing and Linda Bloodworth Thomason writing the great script. So it was as close to director's heaven as Frazier was, which was really director's heaven, you know, because the writing was so great and the actors were so great.
Yeah, I'm going to backtrack for a second, Sheldon. I want to ask you a question for my own gratification. When you wrote Blues in the Night, which was off Broadway, as you say, and then it finally went to Broadway and got nominated for, how many years did that take? for it to go from off to its eventual acclaim and worth?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question because it was intended just to be actually a late night cabaret for 7 performances, just to make some extra money at our little theater. We figured if we can do 2 shows a night, we'll increase the box office. So it was just intended to be the 7 performance thing. It really took off, so we extended it. Then we brought it back about a year later, and then we did it at a couple of regional theaters, and we had producers sort of come in and out. So the first production was in 1979, I believe, and it wound up on Broadway in 1982.
Oh, that's not too long, 3 years. I thought it was, yeah.
Not too bad.
The journey would take a lot longer, yeah.
Yeah, and other shows I've done have taken much longer. I've taken 5, 6, 8 years. So it's all luck of the draw.
You wrote Play On after Blues in the Night?
Play On was much later when I was at the Old Globe Theater. So again, a place where I could sort of make my wishes known. And Jack O'Brien, who is a very well-known Broadway director now, was artistic director. And I said, Jack, I've got this crazy idea. I want to do a version of Twelfth Night set in Harlem in the 1940s using Duke Ellington music. And he briefly looked at me like I was a little bit crazy. And he said, okay, figure it out.
Wow.
And I went about trying to do a treatment and a story, and then working with a very talented writer named Cheryl West. And then, of course, I had all this brilliant Duke Ellington music, which just told the story as well as being great music. So, yeah. And actually, that's another one that went pretty fast. Between when Play On was at the Old Globe and when it was on Broadway, it was about a year and a half.
Well, that's remarkable that you talk about Shakespeare. Twelfth Night. Was you influenced at all by Bernstein's Leonard, with West Side Story being Romeo and Juliet, or West Side Story?
Probably subconsciously. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember thinking about that, but I was aware that there was a tradition of taking Shakespeare and Kiss Me Kate is the same.
Right, exactly.
Takes Tammy and the Shrew and adapts it into a musical comedy. So I was aware that those things went on. Yeah,
that they could work. Yeah.
You got a question?
No, but I really was looking to go back to the book because the book was so much.
Please do.
Well, the name of the book, I don't know if we mentioned the whole name. It's My Own Directions: A Black Man's Journey in the American Theater. And I didn't have the opportunity to read the book. I'm going to confess up front. I wish I did. But I did read the reviews on Amazon. And the reviews are pretty heady stuff, man. And one of the reviews that really stood out to me was it talked about your life in the theater. And it says, worthy of a play, but for now, a book must do. Fortunately, it's a great book. It's entertaining, it's informative, and it's a terrific story. He overcame his racial obstacles with intelligence, savvy, and grace, and prodigious talent. If all the world's a stage, Epps deserves a standing ovation for his performances and for sharing his story, which I thought was a great review. And I wrote it down.
I think I wrote that review really well.
No, but all the reviews were really heady stuff.
My writing of that review is even better than the book.
Yeah, well, you're just kidding, of course. But
I am.
Now you're at the Ford Theater. Can you tell us the significance of that and the heady weight of the history of Ford's Theater, because something pretty horrific happened there in 1865.
Yes, Ford's Theater is justifiably famous for many reasons, but historically famous because it is, of course, where Lincoln unfortunately was killed, watching a play because he was a theater lover. It was not the play that killed him, but a bullet. The theater is still, in some way, it's an operating theater, the producing theater, I mean, that does, season after season of plays, but it's also kind of a shrine to Lincoln, because the box where he was shot is still there and draped with mourning flags and the American flag and all of that. So, there's always kind of the presence of Lincoln in the house. And you can feel it, there's a certain kind of energy that you can feel emanating from the box. And it's beautiful. The theater is owned by the National Parks Service, so it's beautifully maintained. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous 600-seat theater. But in addition to all of its historic aspects, it's also been a producing theater on and off since the 1860s. It was closed a long time, and then it was an army facility for a long time, but it came back, I think, in the 60s as a producing theater, and has been producing ever since the 1960s. And a wonderful theater, in a great city. And I went because they were already doing many of the efforts at diversity that I had been doing at Pasadena for many years. And they asked me to come to help elaborate and further evolve those. So I was happy to come on board to do that.
Great. Speaking of Ford's Theater, that was at the end of the Civil War. I found it ironic that he was shot by an actor, John Wilkes Booth.
Yes. The Booth family was a very complicated family. John Wilkes Booth, of course, was the person who shot Lincoln, but his brother was Edwin Booth, and Edwin was a big, big star. He wasn't a movie star because there were no movies, obviously, but he was as big a theater star as you could be. And basically, his career was ruined because his brother, who was a frustrated actor, who was angry at not having the career that his brother had, did this terrible thing, and the world sort of took it out on Edwin Booth, and his career collapsed after that, and he sort of had none of the feelings that John Wilkes Booth had about Lincoln or politics or any of that. So it was kind of a double tragedy in many ways.
To this day, does the Ford Theater still celebrates Lincoln and their long history from Lincoln. How do they do that?
Several ways. Number one, in addition to being a theater, the building, the Ford Theater building, houses a great museum all about Lincoln. In the basement of the theater building, which used to be little storage and dressing rooms and all of that, there is now a wonderful, wonderful museum that attracts thousands of visitors every year about Lincoln's entire life and history from boyhood through his death at Ford's Theater. You can also, which is unusual for a theater, you can tour the theater because you're not allowed to go into the box, though I may have snuck in.
You and a night janitor may have been in that box.
I may have. Somebody told me that I may have snuck in there. But you can go into the theater and see the box. So even when we're rehearsing in there, people go into the balcony level and look into the box. And then across the street, a great thing, the offices are across the street, and there's a gift store. There is, it must be a tower of books in a spiral, must be about 150 feet high.
Wow.
In the atrium of the building. And every one of those books is about Lincoln.
Wow.
and never repeat it.
Yeah. And the building he died in, it was across the street from the theater. Does the theater now own that building? And is that building still operational?
Yeah, that building is still there. That building is like the theater is owned by the Parks Department.
Okay.
And it's so the theater doesn't really have anything to do with that building, but you can also go in and tour that building and actually see the room where Lincoln was taken. When he was taken across the street after being shot. Yeah.
I wonder if I guess obviously they had to renovate the theater since 1850, but I mean it's they have to have regulations on what they can do to it, how much they can change it. I guess it's sort of like the Faux
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been renovated, but renovated and recreated to look almost exactly as it looked when Lincoln was there. Yeah. So it still has the look of a very, very old, very beautiful, but very old theater.
I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. When you're a firm believer, from what I can gather by reading the reviews of your book and everything else, reading about you, is that you're a big believer in on-the-job training. Like if you're going to do a job, go out and do the job. Like, I mean, that's where you're going to get your chops from and everything else. You had said as a artistic director at Pasadena that you learned how to do it for 2 decades by doing the job, period. And that's...
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. You know, I think a life in the arts is about practice and doing it, not about concept and theories. You know, there are hundreds of books about directing. You know, how to direct a play, directing technique 101, directing technique 125. You know, hundreds of books about directing. And I've read some of them. Fundamentals of Directing was one of the first books I ever read in college. But ultimately, I think you learn to direct plays by going into a room and directing them. I certainly learned to direct television because I was lucky enough to get opportunities to go onto a stage and go into a studio and direct. And I think anytime in the arts, you're going to really learn how to do it. You don't learn it by studying. You don't learn it by taking classes. And I'm not saying that classes are not valuable, but ultimately, you become a director, you become an actor, you become a designer, you become an artist by creating art.
Yeah, and I always tell people in college, college kids say, well, how do I become an actor? And how do I become a director? And how do I, you know, I said, direct in college because college gives you latitude to direct badly.
Right.
Making mistakes.
You know, yeah, you make your mistakes where people forgive you. People aren't expecting a Broadway level production. Maybe a Carnegie Mellon, they could have a higher standard, but you know, you can direct bad at a place, and you can act bad, and you can make bad sets, and you can make your mistakes in college. So when you're coming out, you can't make those mistakes in the real life.
Right, or do what I did. You know, start small. You know, the little theater that I started with my friend was a 50-seat theater. You know, in one room. And, you know, so we can do exactly that. We could try things. We could experiment. We did crazy ideas because nobody really cared. You know, there was no money at stake. You know, nobody was going to lose anything. The budgets were so small. You know, we'd make sets out of stuff we found on the street. But, you know, it was a place to learn my craft. It was a place to learn how to direct. So that when those opportunities later came along to direct on Broadway or off Broadway or in London, I was prepared for it. You know, I think it was Sammy Davis Jr. or somebody like that who said, you can be ready for your break and never get it, or you can get your break and not be ready.
Yep, that's exactly.
Much better to get your break and be ready.
So now I'm going to talk to you about some of the famous people that you've worked with in your television career. So why don't you tell us a little about Friends and some of the cast members of Friends? Anything exciting happened there?
Well, Friends at that time was the biggest hit television show maybe in history.
And to this time, it probably is as well.
It may still be, yeah, you're right. But it was a huge hit. The funny thing about Friends was that because they would do a lot of rewriting on the floor, Friends shootings would go very, very late. It was interesting because I was doing Frazier and Friends at the same time. Kelsey liked for the shooting to be really fast. If you shot for more than 2.5 hours, you were in trouble. So they really got the scripts very tight, very smart by the time you started shooting. And you didn't do a lot of changing. Friends would change a lot on the floor, and you would do a take, and sometimes you'd sit there for half an hour after the take while they rewrote or came up with a better blow to the scene. So a Friends taping would go 1, 2, 2:30 in the morning. You would think that the audience would leave, so much so that they had a backup audience of people to come in and fill the seats when people left. But Friends was so popular that nobody ever left. That audience would just sit there until 2 or 3 in the morning because they loved the show so much.
They brought in a second feeding for at midnight for the audience to stay beyond midnight. I think they had pizza again.
Right. They used to pass through hundreds of boxes of pizza.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And you always said
Friends was great. They were very welcoming. Jennifer Aniston in particular was a sweet, lovely person. She was a big star even then, but she couldn't have been nicer to me and couldn't have been sweeter. And Courtney and all of them really were very welcoming.
And you mentioned Frazier. What were those guys like?
Well, as I said, that was like director's heaven because they were all so good. Kelsey did like to work quickly. I remember our line producer took me over. As I said, I would go visit a set the week before I started. The line producer took me over to introduce me to Kelsey and said, "This is Sheldon. He's going to be directing next week." The very first thing Kelsey Grammer said to me is, "Are you fast?"
Wow.
And you said, if you know your lines, I'll be fast.
I said, I will be fast. Yes. But he did like to work quickly. He would also say, as we were rehearsing, you do a scene once or twice, and you'd say, "I don't need to do it again. Do you need to see it again?"
That's really good.
Director to director.
I think I'm good, Kelsey. I think I'm okay.
Oh, that's pretty funny. As I recall, you did a bunch of George Lopez's for us.
I did.
Why don't you tell us a little about George?
I thought George was great. George was he was fun on the set. He was funny on the set. It could sometimes be a little difficult to get George to rehearse, not necessarily because he didn't like to rehearse, but Frank, you remember this, he would just get onto a riff about something and start doing like a stand-up monologue. And you'd sort of want to stop him, but he was funny. So you also want to
going. Yeah.
And especially once you got to camera blocking day and the whole crew was there, then he had an audience, So somebody would say one thing, we're moving on, and George would just go off on the words "moving on" for like half an hour.
Yeah, it was
in my old neighborhood, there was no place to move on to. You should have seen that place where I live. And you'd be I'd be laughing, but also trying to quiet the crew down and try to keep going. But I also thought everybody else on that show, it was a great family, I thought. Great camaraderie and a lot of fun and good food, as I remember. The food on the George Lopez show was always great.
A lot of great Mexican food for sure.
That's right.
For sure. Barry brought it in from a place that George used to go when he was a kid.
Oh, wow.
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
It was great.
Really good, authentic Mexican food. Yeah.
And then you did a lot of great shows. There was My Wife and Kids, Everybody Loves Raymond, so many shows. But then you became the house director almost on Girlfriends. You did 59, 60 episodes of that over the course of his life. Why don't you tell me how, or tell us how that came about and the cast of that show? And
yeah, it was interesting. I think it really came about partially by Kelsey. Kelsey's company, GramNet, was one of the producers of the show, and Steve Stark, who used to work at Paramount, had started running Kelsey's company. So I knew both of them, obviously, from having done Frazier for several years. So I did not direct the pilot, actually, because I was doing a play in Washington, D.C., and I was already committed to doing the play, so I didn't do the pilot. But I did the third episode of the first season, and there was just kind of a general feeling that that was the episode where the show really came together, where everybody sort of felt like they found the show. And everything kind of clicked. And Mara Brock Akil, who was the creator showrunner, just really loved what I did on that episode. So when the show was picked up for the back nine, I did most of those episodes. And then for the next 4 years, in those great days when we used to do 24 episodes, I would do 16 or 18 of the 22 or 24. So it was the closest I ever came to having the Jimmy Burrows experience of doing almost every show. And there's something really wonderful about that, about getting to know everybody on the set so well and knowing the actors so well that you just have a kind of shorthand, which makes everything go so much more smoothly and faster. So yeah, I love that show.
And why don't you tell us who the actors were in that cast?
Tracy Ellis Ross, who did okay after that. She's probably never not been on television since then. Golden Brooks.
And she's Tracy Ellis Ross is Diana Ross's daughter.
Oh, really?
And she also plays Anthony Anderson's wife on Blackish. So
Blackish.
She's had a nice little career for herself.
Yeah. Golden Brooks, Persia White, Jill, oh, I just forgot Jill's last name. And a great guy among all these women. There's a great guy named Reggie Hayes, who is really one of the best young character actors I ever worked with. Just always nailed a scene. Sadly, has kind of disappeared since then, but he was so talented, so really wonderful.
Derek, you had a question?
No, go ahead. Sorry. But I think we'll bring Reggie Hayes back after this show.
Good.
This show will reinvigorate his career for sure.
Somebody should. He was a really talented guy.
Billy and I are looking at each other like, what
happened? Where'd that come from? What happened?
Well, I want to mention something nice Sheldon did for a friend of mine who passed away in 2007 by the name of Marty Nedboy. And Marty was perhaps the funniest guy I've ever been around. And he was beloved by everybody. And we needed to do a memorial for Marty. And I knew we couldn't find a place big enough. So I called Sheldon. I said, would you mind so much if we used the Pasadena Playhouse?
Wow.
And Sheldon said, didn't miss a beat. He said, absolutely. And we had people like Susan Egan, who was a previous guest, performing, George Lopez performing, Jay Thomas performing. And I don't know how big the Pasadena Playhouse is, but we filled it with 3/4 of people. And we thought that Marty would have been so happy to have had his memorial at the Pasadena Playhouse. And I'll never thank you enough for your kindness and generosity toward Marty Nedboy.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was always my philosophy that a theater belongs to everybody. It's not my theater and I get to do only what I want to and everybody else stay away. Theater really belongs to the community. So as often as possible, around other things we were doing, I would try to keep the theater alive. It really came from my father. My father was a Presbyterian minister, and he firmly believed that it was wrong for the church just to open up on Sunday mornings. He thought the church should be alive and full of people all the time. So we had, Boy Scout troops and Girl Scout troops and youth orchestra and bands and art classes and all of that. So I always remembered that about my father's church and tried to treat Pasadena Playhouse that way.
Yeah, and again, that was such a great day for us because Marty was a dialogue coach on a couple of shows, and we had all the cast from Suddenly Susan showed up, the cast from Nikki showed up, the cast from George Lopez showed up to pay tribute to Marty, and Susan Egan did a parody of the song that she made famous in the Broadway play Cabaret. I mean, she didn't make it famous, but she took it to another level. It was a wonderful, wonderful day. So again, thank you very much for that.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
I got
well, we've done wonderful things for each other, Frank. I'll say that.
Good to hear.
We have
it's always good to hear.
I have a couple questions for you. These are a little bit hard, but because we have a hard out in about 10 minutes. But
okay,
what stories that are not being made now would you like to see being made on television and or in the movies?
Well, first of all, I think we've come a long way with that. Given the fact that people of color used to be only maids and butlers and drug addicts, so we've come a long way. But we get a lot of what I call unsung hero stories.
Yeah.
I just read yesterday that the man who invented the ice cream scooper, was black. So you guys know that?
No.
Right. Nobody does. And that was only one of many inventions of his. Stories like the Tuskegee Airmen, and huge effect that they had on winning World War II. I appreciate any great story about Martin Luther King or Thurgood Marshall, but those are the giants that everybody knows about. I really would love for us to do more stories about the unsung heroes, the small person, and I don't mean that in size or stature, but in recognition, the small person who did great, great things.
Yeah.
Small person, big story.
Yep.
Yeah, great. And then
that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, great avenue. Next question is, what's your process for creating? So writing, creation, and I guess we should probably tie in some directing as well. Like, how do you get yourself to the level that you are at?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I just was with a young, hopeful producer, writer, director over the weekend, and he talked about that. It's not a science. It's not something that you can calculate. Creativity. I mean, you have to a certain degree. I think you have to leave yourself open to it. You have to leave your channels open and sort of receive what comes to you with creativity. Now, once the idea is there, you got to go to work. You have to do research. You have to study. You have to craft. I'm a believer in not to sound too woo-woo about this, but letting the universe come to you with a great idea. And that's how Play On happened. That's how that crazy idea of Shakespeare, Harlem in the 40s, Duke Ellington came to me.
Right.
So just leaving what I call leaving your channels open to be inspired, and then doing the work that inspiration inspires. In terms of directing craft, I believe two things are vitally important for directors. One is respect for the material. You have to try to tell the story that the writers are trying to tell, not the story you want to tell, unless you want to go and write the story, you know.
Right.
But when you're directing it, you have, your job is to clarify the story as the writers want to tell it, with the designers, with all of the production elements, but also with the actors, to guide the actors in the process of finding how to tell that story. And then in my work with actors, I think my firm belief is that a good director's job is to encourage the actor's instinct so that the actor can be great. Good actors, smart actors, usually have good instincts and good ideas, but they need to be given permission, in a way, as you give a child permission to play, to fulfill the instinct that they're having and to feel safe about it so that they're willing to take big chances. And sometimes you might fall on your face, but that's okay, because then you just go with another big instinct and find something that works.
Wow.
Yeah, a great director friend of mine, Howard Morris, who was a terrific actor and television director, said to me, the key for me is to find out what the actor believes in, because
yes.
If he's a good director, I can direct him to do what I want, but I have to see what he wants and because what he believes in, and he'll own it if he believes in it.
Yeah,
I think that's true. Now and then, you do have to encourage an actor to believe that your idea is his or her idea.
Yes.
You got to finesse. Yeah. Got to finesse a little bit. But it's interesting.
Right. Now and then you have to say, you know, that I see you have an idea of what you want to do here.
That's good.
What were you going to say, Billy?
I just think it's terrific when you're talking about, you know, you have to respect the play first and respect the work itself to be able to use it. And then it just flashed me to Shakespeare with the play's the thing. It's the play. It's about the play. It's not about you. It's not about the actors. It's the play.
Right. No, that's true. Whether it's Shakespeare or Eugene O'Neill or Tennessee Williams, or, you know, an hour drama or a half-hour comedy script. If it's a good story, your job is to tell that story clearly and with passion.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that maybe you haven't been asked before. How do you direct an actor who's got something, he's taken a job that he really doesn't believe the material? But it's a job, and it's a paying job, and actors get paid to act. So how do you direct someone who takes a job in the theater that maybe doesn't really have faith in the material?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Hopefully we don't cast anybody like that. But,
you fire him and replace him with an actor who does.
Well, no, I mean, at a certain point, you may have to say, look, you're here and we're doing this play. This play is not going to change. I believe in this play. The theater believes in this play. The theater believes in this the producers believe in this television script. This is the job we're doing. If you cannot find a way to devote yourself to it, the play's not going to go away. The script is not going to go away. So you may have to go away.
Right.
Or you have to find a way to convincingly devote yourself to it.
So you deal
and stop watching it.
You deal with them honestly.
Yeah.
I got another question. This is all good stuff. I want to go back to something you said about directing and telling the story in the way that the story's supposed to be told. But as a director and as a creative person, how do you keep yourself out of that process? Because you still have to be creative, and you also have to grasp the idea of the story that's supposed to be told. So how do you differentiate the two things?
Yeah. Well, first thing I would say is, you're not. It's not a competition between you and the writer. The writer is your partner.
Right.
So if there's something you don't understand in the script, ask the writer. And there's no failing on a director's part to say, I'm not sure what you're after here. I'm not sure what this is all about.
Got it.
Yeah, right. And sometimes the question helps to clarify the writer's own thoughts and might make him write it better. But there's nothing wrong with asking that question. And then, to a certain degree, I think part of what you have to do as a director is make yourself an audience member. Make yourself watch it not as a director, but as the person who is eventually going to be watching it, and really question, is this clear to the person seeing it for the first time? Because a lot of times you see plays or you see shows or movies even where you think, I bet everybody involved understands this completely, but I have no idea what is going on. Because they haven't removed themselves and their participation in it and allowed themselves just to be an audience member, to really see it clearly and fully as if they're seeing it for the first time. And that's hard to do, when you're in the fourth week of rehearsal. But you got to remove yourself and say, okay, I'm watching this as if I've never seen it before.
Wow, that's great. That's great stuff. Closing questions? Derek?
I just have a comment. I think your description of your job and your process of creativity and just everything that you have imparted to the audience, us right now and the audience in the future, I think it's been a great description of what it's like to be a creative person.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope it's helpful to whoever's listening.
And watching.
And watching.
Yeah, well, again, you wanted diversity on stage and off stage, and rightfully so. And one of the quotes I read about you is, you wanted your race to be recognized, but never as a reason for employment or as a crutch. And from what I can tell, you've certainly stayed true to that. Thank you very much for coming on, and really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a battle sometimes, but yes, I have stayed true to that, and hopefully opened up that door for others who are coming along now.
And Billy, the title of the book is?
The title of the book is My Own Directions, A Black Man's Journey in the American Theater. And thank you for that as well. I'm going to read it, and I will read it.
And keep fighting keep fighting the good fight, my friend.
I will. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be with you. I enjoyed talking to you guys.
Thanks for being with us. You've been terrific.
Real pleasure. Thank you, Sheldon.
Take care.
Interesting guy, huh?
Yeah.
Very interesting guy. I often wonder now, with Broadway being the way it is, and you don't see playwrights like Eugene O'Neill or Arthur Miller, or, you don't see that Tennessee Williams. Now you see like these productions like Springsteen and the Jersey Boys and the Temptations that you went to see. Is that the direction they're going in?
And Tina Turner. That probably would have been a good
question to ask.
Good question to ask.
Yeah, it was just a time. We had so many other questions to ask. I think it was time constraints.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
But
it seems like it's going.
You got to give people what they want.
You got to give people in the theater.
Give people what they want.
In the seats,
they want Donna Summer shows. They want Temptation shows. They want Michael Jackson shows. And they want revivals. They want Oklahoma. It's pretty hard.
It's hard to believe that they'd want Oklahoma at this stage. It seems like it would be dated, but of course, Rodgers and Hammerstein and music is never dated.
We're going to London in September, and Guys and Dolls is the big new thing opening in London in advance of its. I think it's open in December in advance of its September its spring debut on Broadway. So.
Luck be a lady tonight.
Well, Luck was a lady with us today.
Always, brother, always. It's always a pleasure.
A great job. Thanks so much for being alive at the switch. prompting me when I can't remember words, Derek.
Thanks for tuning in, people out there. We appreciate it.
And again, we're a couple of authors ourselves, so pick
That's
up
right.
Lamar's Gamble, Combustible.
If these lips could talk, Confessions of a Bronx Bookie.
You'll be quite surprised.
You'll be entertained. You'll be entertained, by God. Bloody entertaining books.
Thank you, my friends. Be well.
You want to do an English accent and send us off, Derek? I know.
Great.
Next week's guest, multi-talented actor Peter Onorati.